This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, my name is Novo Mana, and welcome to another session of the Technology Review Council. Today, we're very pleased to have Stephen and the the Work People Analytics Group presenting to us. And I'm not going to even do a little premise on this one. I think I said it in the email. It's going to blow your mind, and it's going to be very relevant to what we're trying to do these days in the remote workforce situation. So, Stephen, please introduce yourself and let's get into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Stephen Smith. I work for WPA. I find myself in Iowa, of all places, so wave next time you're passing through or passing over, I suppose. My partner today is Jamal, who is in San Francisco. He works with me on the WPA team. And today we're going to walk you through the WPA platform that we just heard about. Usually I like to start with, understanding the problems that we're trying to address, but there's too many of you to ask that question with. So I thought maybe it would be better to talk about the problems that we solved that led to the creation of this tool. Between Jamal, myself, my partner Kevin, we had seen an issue and an opportunity in the world of workplace and employee assessments. A lot of pain points and problems. I personally worked at a Fortune 500. My job was running all of the employee surveys throughout the course of the year for every single employee we had globally. And a lot of those challenges and problems came up that we now seek to address. One of those big ones is the idea that, when we're measuring employees, we're usually doing it with about 15 different assessments, right? You have your new hire survey, you have your, new hire satisfaction survey, recruiter satisfaction survey, onboarding survey, engagement survey, benefits, you name it. Employees are getting hit 1,000 different ways, which probably leads to that analysis paralysis. Now, the problem with having all those different assessments is that oftentimes, other than being expensive, it's really hard to have a standardized set of data to really work from. Because now I have 12 different assessments that tell me I have 12 different issues. Where do I prioritize my time? What do I focus on? The other problem that we often solve is that the methodology itself in terms of employee assessments are all kind of done the same way. And it really leads to a lack of actionability on the back end. And honestly, if leaders can't use it and it's not actionable, they're going to find out that they're not going to be very supportive of our HR direction. So between the idea of actionability and then understanding prioritization is some of those pain points that really led to this tool. Now, with that, I'm going to flip off the screen so you don't need to see us talking and kind of jump into it on the back end. And where I'm going to start with, as soon as I can figure this button out, is the idea of the classic engagement survey. So every survey that we've ever taken, whether it be the classic engagement survey, benefit survey, you just bought a cup of coffee, on a scale of 1 to 5, how good do we do? They're all based on that same methodology. And that methodology goes something like this. You answer a certain amount of questions, 1 to 100. You answer every single one of those questions on a scale usually of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Then that analysis or that information comes back to someone like me, the analyst, and they say, all right, Stephen, which action item should we focus on this year? Well, that's tough. Depends. Do you focus on the item that has the lowest overall satisfaction or the item that has the highest amount of dissatisfaction, right? Because those are the pain points, and all leaders jump straight to red. Or do you focus on the item that's furthest away from the benchmark that your organization cares about? Or the item that's trending down, or the item with the highest amount of neutral scores, right? Because those are the fence sitters. Long story short, I just rattled off a few. The dirty secret of this game is that usually we guess. My Fortune 250, I guessed pay for performance, right? Super easy. Low satisfaction, high dissatisfaction, no one's paid enough. That's scary. That's not what data is supposed to be about. We want to understand what matters most. So just in the idea of changing methodology, I want to start with kind of our satisfaction or engagement module. And what we do is something different. What we do is we take kind of all of these organizational constructs we're all very familiar with, and instead of making you go through every one of those questions on a scale of 1 to 5, we're going to start off by saying, all of these matter to you, of course, to some level or degree, but why don't you go ahead and pick 5 that matter most to you, and then tell me how much you like it or don't like it. And as subtle and nuanced as that force ranking is, all of a sudden we're starting to address trade-offs with our employees and prioritization, right? Because, any analyst worth their salt, honestly, would probably focus on this item down here, storage, 0% satisfaction, 80% dissatisfaction. That's the item we need to focus on. What we're going to tell you is, in reality, your organization, only 7% of your population said that was a big deal. So I'm not saying they're not important. Maybe that 7% is an actual team that has a need, but I am not going to go make a decision to add a square foot of storage for everybody on campus based on 7% of the population. This is noise, y'all. And this is the noise that every other assessment vendor is going to point you to every time. So instead, what we do is do something different. Again, because we ask people to tell us what they care about the most. Now also we can start to focus on items that the most amount of people called out as being a big deal. We talk about EVP and employee value proposition all the time. This is how you start to discover your workforce's EVP. Here are the things that matter to the most of us, whether it's good or bad. In this organization, the number one most important thing in terms of satisfaction in the working environment isn't the leadership, it isn't the salary, it isn't having a variety of spaces or sustainability. It's having the right tools and technology to do my dang job. Great, that's awesome for us to be able to now focus on. Number 2 is the location of the office. Number 3 is collaborative teamwork. Number 4 is work-life balance. Number 5 is development, and they're all really happy. Send that to our recruiting team, right? Those are now our value propositions in the market. Now, I'm going to show you a few different things along the way, but as I do, know that everything I'm showing y'all can be cut and customized by all of the different demographics in the organization, right? Because obviously, millennials probably have different workplace needs than baby boomers. I'm sure accounting has different needs or satisfaction points than the sales team does. And by being able to slice and dice these, that's where we're starting to be able to understand, the 80% that's common across the organization, and start to be able to focus on the 20% of the population that really needs the nuance. But I'll come back to that. The other part in terms of, focusing on what matters most, and again, why this is valuable, if I want to sort this by my top performers and attract and retain the top talent, what do my top performers need in order to be successful? And those are the people that we want to keep, right? So in addition to now having some sort of prioritization, again, we can start to put our resources and our time and our energy where it's going to have the most impact versus focusing on some of this noise that most organizations and assessments would. But the other part's the usability of this thing. If I'm an employee and I'm going through this list, we all have survey fatigue. We've taken these things 1,000 times. We also do a thing called branching surveys. So for example, most surveys would say, hey, location's an item you need to focus on. You would say, great, well, what about it? And that's where you kind of be left. And then we're either doing more focus groups or more surveys. And again, that's where the survey exhaustion comes in. But we, like a old school Goosebumps book where you kind of choose your pathway, we do a lot of branching. So if you said, for example, location was an item that mattered most to you, we're going to branch you off and say, hey, you said that location mattered a lot. What did you mean? What part of your location matters most to you? Is it being downtown in the swing of things? Or in this case, is it more a matter about commute time and being able to access the work? These are the kind of branching questions that now help us as the analysts and as the business owners start to dive in deeper to what did they mean by that. And if you didn't click that, you didn't care, you're going to go right on by, which keeps the user interface really hot. 10,000 foot view, that's kind of one of the reasons we call this a digital interview versus a survey, because again, like an interview, I'm going to ask you a question. How's your day? If you tell me your day, sucks, I'm going to follow up with a different question. Oh no, why is that? And these are the kind of things we're trying to mimic with our digital interviews. So a lot of branching and a lot of prioritization goes into this model. Now, that's kind of just the first piece. We talked about 2 pain points, one of which being, there's 1,000 different surveys the employees are going through a year, which is costly, time consuming, makes it hard to prioritize. So what we've done is we've put all of these different stories, and we're going to go through a few of these, maybe not all of them, but we're going to go through a few of these today. And all of these come from 20 to 25 minute assessments. And again, now once you start to have multiple data points that all start to corroborate to paint one picture, that's when leaders stop debating, the validity of your results, but instead they start to lean forward and say, oh my God, why is that happening? And that's the position that we want to be in as consultants, as leaders, as HR business partners. We want to help consult on action on the back end versus wasting our time trying to debate if the front end is good. Jamal, I'm sure I missed about 1,000 things on this module, but I don't want to get too deep. Is there any other things that I'm missing?
I don't think you missed anything. quite frankly, this is a way for organizations to crowdsource information that pertains to the way their workforce, their organization is creating value, and prioritizing what makes the most difference for them. I think it's worth saying uh, the participation on average is 75 to 80% participation across small and large organizations. That's organizations that are 200 FTEs and organizations that are north of 1,000 FTEs. And this is very powerful information. I think it's worth mentioning. I was listening to a company share their workplace program not too long ago, and the individual was asked, of the lessons, what did you learn or found most shocking? And they went right to storage. They said storage is a number one concern. Storage is the thing to pay attention to, and it's very important. But that was based off of customer sats and that them having a very low customer sat rate, as opposed to the importance that storage lent to that organization creating value. So I just wanted to restate that the stack ranking is an important feature.
Absolutely. I I moved here to Iowa for my first job from Louisiana, and we did one of these surveys that I was part of. It's my survey, we were part of it. And one of the items was about sustainability, to your point. And I think, our company on a scale of 1 to 5 is a 1. I don't think we're green at all here in Iowa, not in this building anyways. So what do? We spent hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars in our company refresh doing all of these different things, hiring all of these experts, hiring full-time staff on sustainability. What they never asked me is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how good is it? 1. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you care? I would have said 1. I don't care at all, to be quite frank with you. I mean, I know most of y'all are in California, and I apologize, and I'm becoming more aware of my surroundings. But at the time, being from Louisiana, I just loved that they had these underground parking, these skywalk things here in Iowa, because I do not like snow. That's what really matters to me. But instead of focusing on that, again, they went the sustainability route because it had the highest amount of red. Being able to prioritize, to your point, Jamal, is exactly how we start to focus our resources on where it's going to have the most impact for our workforce. So appreciate that.
Stephen, this is Nov. If I could ask a very quick question as well.
Great.
So,
Yeah.
with certainly over the last, shall we say, several months, I keep losing track of time. Have you had any clients using this as a way of judging job vis-a-vis remote workforce? In other words, where's the satisfaction between working at home and what I'm trying to do, and where are the difficulties? And I'm curious, to Jamal's point, you have something that pops up and go, I didn't know that was a problem, or how high a problem it is for our employees. So what are you finding in some of those studies using WPA?
That's a great question, Nov, and I swear that was not planted. That's a good question. Because, yeah, honestly, a lot of our work is, of course, in this HR space, but a lot of our work's also in the ops space. And ops are trying to figure out this whole remote working thing, just like HR is, just as well as real estate is, because this has an impact on how much space should I buy. So one of the items, and something that we really do in our branching, if an employee indicates that they're working from home a certain amount of time, we're going to follow you up and ask you questions about the home working environment. What behaviors do you do best at home versus in office? We also ask people just straight up about the mobility and how much it matters to them. Sometimes we'll find out that mobility is a top item of concern and fairly well dissatisfied. We then go to one of our branches and said, hey, where are you working today, or pre-COVID? Where are you working today, and where would you work from most effectively from in the future? Now, I've done plenty of seat sensors and all those studies, and I find out that by including people in this dummy question, where do you work from today? Don't really care. Where would you be more effective in the future? Now, two things start to happen. I have people who are, voluntarily jumping on board and solving a problem with me versus trying to measure them and cut space, so to speak. And now that I start to understand, where they'd be most effective from the future, think of change management, what's stopping you from working that way? And if we can start to identify some of these things in terms of attitudes, we're going to switch over here in just a second. But in terms of attitudes, if we can find out how big of a pain point is this, and by the way, does that change for our younger generation or for our sales team or et cetera, and understand what that needs to look like in the future, well, now we can start to talk about different policies and procedures and, of course, place plans. So maybe to that point, go ahead, Nov.
I was going to just say, as you pointed out something interesting, it occurred to me that would be interesting to see not necessarily generation, but tenure. In other
Yeah.
words, the new people coming in who might have been hired even in this COVID situation or just prior are more accepting of this situation vis-a-vis that of those who've been long-term employees and such. Like I say, to your point, it's not only just the policy, procedure, whatever you want to talk about, or program. It is also attitude, and attitude would be a tremendous thing to understand to be able to change people's attitude. So you're right on the money. I love that. I love that idea. That's cool.
No, even to enlighten, we'll have conversations with business leaders, and they may say something like, "Oh, this organization doesn't collaborate very often. This is a high the organization comprised of highly educated experts, and typically do individual focused work." And that might be true for that demographic in which the leadership is part of. But what you find through the course of doing this assessment is perhaps those with less tenure or even younger in age actually do and have collaborated. And it is a large part of the organization's behavior. So you gain insights from going in and crowdsourcing this types of information that will lead to your strategy.
No, that's a good point. Thank you.
And it informs the holistic employee experience versus just one kind of granular approach, right? So I think, going to pivot. I'm just going to be flexible with y'all because I think you just said something that makes me think of a different part of this that's probably important to highlight. We talked about methodology and the buy-in leaders give you depend on the actionability. And this attitudinal stuff is great for that. Being able to prioritize with your leaders now is going to make them feel better about not drowning in the ocean and actually having something that matters most. But sometimes leaders don't even buy into that, right? They've been burned by too many of these surveys. And yeah, people say they want to be mobile. And yeah, ask me what I want. I want a wet bar in my office. Yeah, I want a lot of things. So it's also important that we start to, in HR, start to balance the attitudinal data with the behavioral data. And this is something that's really special and unique to us. So in addition to measuring what matters most about the working environment, we also measure how the population and workforce actually gets the work done. So this is a behavioral module, which is part of that same assessment I told you about. This is literally how this workforce works. Each one of these bubbles you're seeing is a unique working behavior that's happening inside this organization. The bigger the bubble, the more time that's being spent on it. And then where these bubbles fall in this grid are completely dependent upon the answers we get from employees. So this obviously is the back end of an assessment. Any of these bubbles can fall in this x-axis depending upon how complex the work is, right? So in this organization is things like writing, analyzing, designing. Is that novel? Is it new? Does it require expert judgment? Is it different every time? Or is it something a little bit more administrative, a little bit more transactional or procedural, right? And then the y-axis, any of these bubbles can fall north or south depending upon how collaborative that behavior is. I mean, like archiving or reviewing or telephoning, are you often doing this by yourself in an isolated format? Or are you doing this in a very collaborative environment, like conversations, programming, brainstorming, designing? So now these bubbles start to fall in these grids, and it starts to really help you understand my transactional skill sets, my transformational skill sets. How do I support these very heads down, focused expert workers? Now we're starting to able to understand and diagnose behaviorally how an organization's working. And again, just not to be a broken record, everything I showed you can be cut and customized because it should, right? Because HR doesn't work the same way as IT, and legal services sure as heck doesn't work the same way as policy. And to be able to understand those is really how you start to empower, boots on ground leaders to actually take hold and control of their own environment. But the last part of this one, before I pause again, is the idea of so what? Yeah, this is how we're working, that's great, but why does that really matter? Well, the last question we say is, employee, regardless of what you're doing, how often you're doing it, how many hours in the week does it take, regardless of how complex or how collaborative, how important is that time that you're spending when you're trying to meet your individual and team goals, right? Because you only have 40 hours. You're obviously trying to do the right things. Our belief is that when employees are aligned with the things that provide their job value, that's when they're really in their zone. That's when they're in the flow, right? So that's going to be indicated by the colors of these blues, or as you see my bar chart on the right turning red, how far in the bar chart it falls. So any of these behaviors that are on the top or super dark blues like these are over here, These are the behaviors that provide a whole lot of value to employees when they're trying to get their job done. The behaviors that are lighter in color or farther down on this bar chart, these are the behaviors that push come to shove is kind of a waste of my time and not helping me get my job done at all. So now we're starting to understand, we all know we're in too many meetings, right? But it's not, I had a client that I walked through this information with. They're spending 15 to 20% of their time in formal meetings, and then they're 10% of the time searching for information. And they're wondering why they're not getting all they can out of their workforce. Hire more or work harder. No, let's align and figure out what are these mismatches between this, employee labor time and the value it provides our organization. And if there's a big mismatch, that's really important areas for us to understand, diagnose, and improve upon. So now, Nove, and there's still going to be another module that's going to continue to answer that one question you asked, especially about remote work. But it depends on the kind of working you're doing. If it's not a very collaborative worker, if it's a heads down department or employee, like maybe your accounting department, for example, maybe those are the skill sets and behaviors that are better supported in a home environment versus a collaborative office, right? So 10,000-foot view, we talked about, prioritizing what matters most in terms of engagement constructs. And now we're pairing that with how is the work actually happening and what's the value of the time spent in my organization. Just in case while I'm going through this, if you all want to chat any questions along the way, this is not supposed, I don't believe these are supposed to be presentations. I think this is supposed to be conversational casual. So if you all have any questions, would love to hear thoughts or opinions. And Jamal, Nove, what am I missing on this one, you think?
Nothing. I think you're spot on. I think if there are no questions, we can press on.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe the next one I'm going to take you through, because it's becoming so important today, is back to the attitudinal side. We talked about what matters most to you. We talked about what are you doing, but now we want to measure the culture, right? Because culture eats strategy for breakfast, they say. But the problem is nobody seems to measure it. Every time I ask an organization, how do you measure your culture? They give me a blank stare, or sometimes they point at the engagement survey. Engagement is not culture. Now, I'm going to switch to the culture module. I'm not sure if anybody's seen this before, but I'm going to pretend that none of you have and walk you through it real quick. The way this model works is it helps an organization, all employees, and you can break this down, and ask all employees how to define the current culture. And then it asks the organization, hey, if we're going to reach our highest aspirational goals in the next 5 years, what does that culture need to look like? And overlapping these shapes is where we start to understand cultural alignment. It's important to know the shapes because that'll tell you the definition, but the level of alignment is, very heavily correlated and with favorable business results, especially financial performance, which makes sense, right? If everybody's aligned and says this is the place it needs to be, chances are you're rowing the same direction. Chances are if there's a big gap and people are saying, those old guys on the 6th floor, man, they don't get it. Chances are we're not running as fast as we can, right? So 10,000-foot view, what this model shows. Bottom right-hand corner, this means that this team or this department, I'm looking at overall, but I'll break it down here in a second. This organization's culture is really defined by this external market-facing competition mode. Right? These are like performance-based teams, aggressively competitive. Capture what you kill, eat what you kill. Star performance is highly supported here. Quarterly quotas, stretch goals, all that stuff. And that's going to be different from this top right corner, which is still external facing. Hey, we are still trying to win the market, no doubt about it. But we're going to do it by being more creative, by creating new ideas, by leaning into the future of work. These are the teams or departments or organizations that are really leading that charge. These are change champions, by the way. Now, if you go to the left side, we're going to start thinking about the internally focused organizations and cultures. The top left corner is like intrinsically focused on who we are as a people. The mission, the vision, the values, do we feel like a family here? Is it based on loyalty and trust and open communication, internal learning and development? And then lastly, in this bottom left-hand corner is all about kind of that command and control culture, right? These are the organizations that have a little bit tighter reins, very risk averse, and really performance-based, keeping processes very, very tight. So 10,000-foot view in this organization, what we're looking at is, first of all, an organization is primarily defined by their internal focus culture, right? They believe in who they are and what they're doing. They feel close to the mission, but things are very strict and stringent. They're very tight. Where they think they need to go in the future is they need to become a little bit less market aggressive, a little bit less stability and control all around. And they'd honestly like to put those points mainly into coming up with new ideas. The way we've always won is not the way we're going to win in the future. We've got to come up with something new. And that's how this culture module is really going to work, to think about who are we today? How do you truly define where we are and where we're going, and what is the gap in that? What that helps us do is, again, of course, understand where we're at. It also helps us identify challenges. If you take this, like we have for several of our clients, and you put this over a multi-location portfolio, and you compare this gap to their P&L or their attraction retention levels, you can very quickly see, without any kind of calculation, the organizations and why they're performing or not. The other thing you can start to do is understand vision alignment. Oftentimes when we work with our consultants and our end user partners, we find out that the project's dang near doomed from the beginning because the management team isn't on board, right? So what do I mean? So in this organization, there's only 150 people. I'm going to go grab all the individual contributors, so like 95% of the population, which is why these shapes haven't really changed, right? Because that's the skew in terms of the headcounts. But now as I can compare that to the 8 C-suite members, the 8 leaders of this organization, we see a little bit something different. First of all, currently, they pretty much agree. Yeah, we agree with y'all. That is who we are today. The only difference is, man, those top 8 C-suite members, they're pushing even harder to be innovative. Let's keep going, y'all. We see it. We agree with you. Let's keep going. Let's go faster. Great news. But then you go compare this to the midline managers. And what you see already is that these shapes, and I'll explain in a second, but are completely different. Not only do these, managers, not think that they're hierarchical like everyone else did, they're rolling the exact opposite direction. They want more structure. They want more formal rules, which is the exact opposite of everybody else in that organization. They're not trying to be more innovative at all. Get over that. And they think they're off the chart in market dominance. Now, if your midline managers and your top line leaders have creative differences that create, good, healthy tension, this could be a very good thing. More often than not, this usually indicates that there's a misalignment in terms of mission, vision, values, and our direction. I'm a military brat. This is the equivalent of the generals telling the troops that we're going this way tomorrow morning, see you at 5 a.m. 4 a.m., the lieutenants wake them up and say, don't listen to those old guys, follow me, we're going this way. Like, you'll never win that battle, right? The war is already lost. So for us to be able to start to understand and really start to break down vision and alignment and direction and cultural alignment with these different teams or levels of the organization provides a whole heck of a bunch of help in terms of actually getting things done and getting things done right. But again, I can see I'm talking again a lot.
Not at all.
Oh,
You're doing very good, Stephen. Very good. Only other thing that I would add to this is it is a strong indication for your organization or facets of your organization, particular business units, and their propensity or openness to change. So if there is a strategy or some type of change management initiative that you're planning, this will give you a good indication of how much work needs to be done in order to ensure that that change management campaign is successful.
Absolutely. And if you know where they are and how they define themselves and where they kind of want to be, now we as change management experts can start to tailor our messaging to really get to the heart of the issues with these employees of these groups, right? So I think there's probably only 2 things I'm going to show you, because I want to be respectful of time and very open for feedback from the audience, certainly. So I'm going to probably focus on maybe 2 more items quickly. The second to last one is going to be the idea of a network analysis. I'm sure many of us are familiar with network analyses, but again, we challenge the methodology and do something different. So 10,000-foot view, if you're not familiar with the network analysis, this information shows you essentially who works with whom. Like, how does information flow? How does the job get done? What are those collaboration patterns? The first thing you'll notice on this is kind of the coloration, and that's going to represent how information is primarily flowing. What are the handoffs? Are they virtual email, phone calls like this, or are they physically in the office, face-to-face, or somewhere in between? This client broke their network analysis, based on their portfolio location, so obviously a lot of virtual. The next thing you might notice is the thickness of lines, which represents how much volume is going between these teams. I mean, are these teams all hands on deck with each other every day, or are they kind of distributed around the network? The next thing you'll notice as I start to highlight these teams is you'll start to see different colors, which is going to represent which direction is that information flowing. Is it outgoing? Do I have a hub and spokes model where one team's constantly pumping out information? Or do I have a marble chat, so to speak? Is everyone working together in a correlated? Or do I have silos that we all talk about? That color and that directionality is going to really start to help you think how the value chain in your organization goes before it hits the customer. Now, the last part of this one, and the so what piece again for us, kind of like the behavioral thing, the behavioral side. Yeah, you might work with these guys and you might be doing a lot of collaboration, but I hope in this room, we can all agree in this room, in this virtual room, not all collaboration's created equal, right? Some collaboration sucks and it's a waste of our time. Some collaboration's been done the same way forever. Like, give me a quick story. My company that I worked for, every single quarter, my team and I would have to create a 20-page report to provide to my CHRO, which would then go up to the CEO. The report, had turnover metrics by department, headcount change by country, all that kind of stuff. After doing this for years, one of my teammates got ill for a few months, and we were left scrambling trying to figure out how in the heck did she find this information? What system was that on again? Quickly realized we're going to be late, so had to go to the CHRO. Set expectations. I'm so sorry. We're going to be a week late. Wanted to give you a heads up. And I'll never forget it. She looked at me and said, "Oh, I only look at like 2 metrics on that back page. If you can get that for me, you don't even have to do this report anymore." And my eyes got wide. And I said, "Beth, what do you mean we don't have to do this report anymore? Like, that's been a full-time employee's worth of work for the past 5 years. If we didn't have to do this report, do you know how much more I could have gotten done? Like, that's an extra, my department, that's an extra 25% headcount. My God, why didn't you tell us?" And she looked at me and said, "Stephen, why didn't you ask?" And that has stuck with me ever since. I'm one of those guys in the organization, I'll just stop doing reports to see if people ask for them, kind of thing. And that's what we're trying to uncover here. So the last part of this network analysis is, hey, regardless of how much information, and regardless if 20-page reports are coming to you every Monday, which might look like a lot of email chatter, how important is the information and the collaboration sharing when it comes to meeting your individual and team goals? And that's going to be indicated by the translucency of this line. So regardless of how thick it is, the more translucent it is, the less value it provides. The darker it is, the more important that information is. So in this example, I'm highlighting Boston. And although Boston's working a lot more, spending a lot more time and energy and effort with the communications team, they're finding a lot less value in that than they are the hub. And that's what we're trying to do at an organizational level. We want to find what are those really big, thick lines that are super translucent. A, it's honestly low-hanging fruit. And B, 9 times out of 10, and realistically, 10 times out of 10, it's legacy waste. We've done the same thing the same way for 20 years, and no one has stopped to ask, is this report still necessary? Or do you just need 2 metrics from the back? Which, by the way, I said this a ton of time. And that's what this graph indicates. So, no, you asked a question in the very beginning on the behavioral side about remote working, who's a good candidate, who needs to come back to the office, and how. This is the third piece of that puzzle. Number 1 is who's open for it, who believes in that they can perform in that environment. Number 2, behaviorally, does their work lead towards that kind of worker profile? Are they doing heads down work? Are they doing very collaborative work? And now with our network analysis to know internally, who are the people that need to be the glue in our organization, that are connecting dots, that are in the crowd, versus who are those people who are maybe in a silo that we're okay with. That's how we start to answer that question about remote working. That's how we answer the question about distributed working and distributed leading. That's honestly how we answer a lot of questions about productivity and the work itself.
Terrific. So, Stephen, this is Nov again. I always have questions. Sorry.
Yeah, love them, please.
So how granular is the information that's sitting behind this? So in other words, let's say maybe my objective is to find out specifically, I've gone from a centralized HR department to the more business partner type of the partnership, if you will, with HR folks in the field, and I want to see how that's working. In other words, if I were to take metrics of, let's say, one of the offices and say, hey, that business partner down there, people seem to be satisfied. Let's see if they are sustaining and people are coming to them or they're going out for help. So I'm looking at a kind of high level and then really down granular to how well are we doing on an individual organization, individual level. So can you do that, and is that supported through what you were showing here?
Yeah, kind of 2 answers. So practically, what I would say is we would put, let's say we would name this Atlanta team. Let's just say that they're called, well, let's say they are Atlanta. And your HR team, let's just say that we call these BPs. And we asked everybody in your organization, including Atlanta, hey, how much do you work with the BP team? And granted, they probably only have one, so they only recognize one. That information is now going to flow. So between teams, we can start to find out, yep, this location doesn't work with their BPs very much. This one really doesn't find value. This one does a lot of back and forth, but they're getting nothing out of that juice. This one is green, which means they're going to them. This one's red, which means they're going to them. So you could absolutely get to how is my BP performing and supporting these individual locations? Is that reciprocal, et cetera, et cetera. But I think on top of that, it's important to note, outside of that, we do not provide individual level results. Matter of factly, one of the things that we talk about as a differentiator for our products is the idea of psychological safety, right? So first of all, if any of these groupings, I'll go try to find one. If any of these groupings have under 5 employee responses, we're not going to show you the response. And the reason for that is because we don't want people being able to play the he said, she said game, right? As soon as that happens and people don't trust the system, you're going to have junk in, junk out data forever. The other thing is that idea of, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you like this guy in Atlanta? Well, depends. Is this guy in Atlanta going to see my answers? And if yes, best, and 5, best person I ever worked with. That's not what we want, right? We're not asking about, good or bad. We're asking about now versus future. So long-winded way to answer your questions. Yes, we could absolutely answer the question in the scenario you provided, but on all of these other graphs, we do not provide an individual level, only at a 5 or more group level to protect psychological safety.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking and what I'm seeing even from some of the clients is that they are feeling very strongly about reorganization as a way to solve their problems. And I think this is a very strong indication that reorganization may not be the answer to solve it. In other words, this sounds like a very good precursor to even thinking about the reorganization.
That's a great point. I have 2 hats, HR and corporate real estate. Jamal is stronger on the corporate real estate side with me. But yeah, we see these kind of in 3 areas. On the HR side, this is really helpful for understanding what you just said, reorgs, especially when it's not based on leader hierarchy, but let's reorg a team based on the value of the connection between them. And that's different than volume. On the ops side, this is really helpful because we want to understand, again, to be as effective as a workforce as possible. We're doing processes that aren't, providing value to our internal chain. Let's clean those up. Let's speed up the process so that we can provide quicker, better value to our clients. And then ultimately, from Jamal's space and real estate, we start to think about, when we think about who's going to sit next to whom in an office or how they're going to work and what building should they be in, don't base that off of the org chart that's answering the same questions that we are. Instead, put people next to each other who have the right kind of valuable connections for the business to gain value. So I know I'm using the word value a whole bunch, but that is one of the cornerstones and foundational pieces of this assessment.
Yeah. Well, with the new hub and spoke model that people keep talking about, somewhere between coming into a headquarter, which is a 2-hour commute, versus 2 blocks down the road, but I'm not at home. And for the folks in the audience in there, I'm sure those of you who are parents with homeschooling kids and a spouse in the same room sharing the same space, that kind of becomes a very desirable situation. The idea is that you've got the connection of people first and location second, and that's a better way to look at it than try to just move people around just for the heck of it. Very good. I'm doing a quick time check, and I just want to make sure that we kind of, maybe if you are at a somewhat of a stopping point in the presentation to then go to the next phase, maybe we ask some questions out there and just open up. Does anybody have any questions for Stephen or Jamal at this point? Any comments? We'll certainly ask, shall we say, feedback at the end of this session, but anything that's burning you out there. I don't see anybody in the chat either, so I think we're okay.
All right, well then I'll give you kind of the last piece of all this. And again, I just want to keep high level. There's of course granularity here, but want to keep high level today. The last piece of this for us that's really important, and I think a differentiator. All these engagement surveys that we're used to, even if you've done a culture survey, this behavioral analysis might be new, the network analysis might be new or might not be. And all this is really important, good information. It's insightful. Our clients say that this is a gut check, especially as they're now coming back from COVID. It's really been helpful throughout this process to understand who, what, when, where, and why. But the problem is, again, for the assessments that I have used and we have used, is it's going to be different tomorrow, right? Like for my organization, we are on an age curve. Like in 5 years, we have like something stupid, like 35% of our headcount eligible to retire. And that's a very big piece of our identity and our culture. What happens when they leave? And all these questions about, what is it going to look like? And oh my gosh, my risk aversion starting to kick in. And that's why we need predictive analytics. So what we provided for our clients is we built in a way to now start to think about the future. Let's build some scenarios, right? We can do a 3-year model, a 5-year model, a conservative model, aggressive model, all hands on deck model. And in these models, you can start to weight different things, right? So if you're on that age curve in an organization the way we were, well, if I know that I'm about to lose a bunch of my baby boomers, let's take all the answers and all the responses in this data set from the baby boomers and weight them down in this one scenario. And you can see things are going to start to repopulate with me as I go now. We know that they're going to be replaced by a bunch of those wacky millennials, and Lord knows those kids work funny. So let's take all the millennials in that data set and weight them up. Again, you start to see things change. Most organizations today, I say every organization is becoming a technology company, right? I know ours is 30% headcount. We're a financial firm. So let's think about adding some more developers in that skill set, because developers have a unique needs, they have unique wants, they behave differently. We got to support them in space and policy in a different way. So let's weight them up. And we know, mobility is coming and automation and any of these things that we now want to weight on any of these scenarios. We can now go create those and go back to any of these modules and say how things are going to change. What will the culture look like in 5 years based on those parameters? If the health department, which is a third of our organization's headcount leaves, what is that going to do to the behaviors and the kind of space we need, or the kind of policies we need to set? And that's why our scenario planning and being predictive is really, really helpful for our clients, because man, it's great to know who you are and where you are today, but we just got our butt kicked by VUCA. We just saw what can happen. And thankfully, most of us scrambled really well. But we can't rely on fast reaction. We got to be proactive. And this information in this tool, and using that scenario planning tool, has really helped our clients feel a lot safer about their decisions in the future versus feeling like they're just kind of throwing darts. So the 10,000-foot view, this is kind of how we measure work and how it's getting done now and in the future, so that we can start to think about, policy and procedure and place decisions based off that fundamental core attribute. No, 10,000-foot view, I didn't want to get too much deeper in it. That's kind of the tool, man. It's kind of the things, the questions we're trying to answer, them problems we're trying to solve, I guess.
Yep. To kind of summarize this with a picture, if you will, Nov, I like to look at the majority of workers today in the U.S. are knowledge workers. Those knowledge workers are producing a large majority of the value that organizations are creating for their clients. And if you look at each knowledge worker as a fruit on a fruit tree, you have collectively the work that they do creating the value for the organization. And in order to improve upon the work that they are yielding, a lot of times, and historically, traditionally, I'll say, we've looked at the tree and we've looked at other trees that are producing fruit in order to determine how to best serve those knowledge workers. Two things. One, you can't observe the knowledge work that's taking place and the way that value is being created. You have to go and have it self-reported. You have to pull that out of the knowledge worker themselves. Two, other organizations have their own culture. They create value differently than yours. So comparing that information isn't necessarily valid or apples to apples, pardon the pun. What instead we suggest you do is look at the roots, look at where the network of infrastructure that support the behaviors, look at the behaviors themselves that are taking place within an organization in order to understand how that organization is indeed creating value and where the legacy waste is. And that's what WPA really does. It's a way to figure out what the DNA is of your organization today, what behaviors are creating value, what behaviors are detracting from the value, and giving you actionable intel to move forward from a strategic point and from a real estate standpoint as well.
As usual, Jamal, you said it better than myself.
Did we lose Nov? Did I put you to sleep with that story, Nov?
No, not in the least bit. So again, the crowd has been relatively quiet. So I want to say, this is an opportunity to really ask Stephen and Jamal particular uses, things that we're seeing in our own, endeavors in an organization. Many of us sitting in the audience there are consultants. Yeah, that's another question. I'll ask it more from I hate to call it pricing, but let's call it pricing for the heck of it. Do you have any consulting firms that are using this tool as a tool going into their clients? And is that something that, as a model, that you guys are looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. Both, from the HR consultant in terms of our executive coaches and action planners, on the operational side is our strategic consultants, and largely in the real estate place from the architects and the designers and the brokers. We usually go through a partner to an end user, because again, these organizations that are getting to be huge are trying to do too much. They want to be the consultants, but they also want to be the analysis and kind of point you to their own dog food, so to speak. We believe in doing what we do really well and focusing on our technology, and then finding the best partners that do what they do really well. So the end delivery, is, A+, like the Ocean's 12 model, so to speak. You go find the best people to work on a project. That way, a customer has the full integrated approach from, idea generation and strategy building all the way through execution in a seamless process. So no, we mostly go through partners.
Very cool. Thank you. There was I'm sure a couple of eyes in the audience lit up.
Well, I've been on 2 of these now, and know, and you told me more about the group. I would be so awesomely open and hungry for any kind of feedback y'all have, things that can improve, things you like, things you didn't like. Maybe it's the New Orleans Saints, I forgot I'm wearing that shirt. Whatever it might be, I'd be super appreciative. Any feedback anyone has.
So let me defer my next question to see if the audience has got any other questions, and please just unmute yourself. I'm sitting on my phone today, which is not the most conducive to check the chat. So if anyone's got a particular question, please go ahead and ask Stephen and Jamal. I'll hold off on my question.
This is Paul. I have to say, I'm not an HR expert, right? That's not my background, but I look at this. I mean, I've provided and supported HR systems for most of my career. But there's so much here, it's a little bit overwhelming. And I have struggled to sort of follow as you move through the different graphs and filters, and I struggled to understand how you came to individual conclusions on some of them. That's one thing. The second thing is, it strikes me like on the satisfaction criteria, I mean, how do you go through and really identify what it is you're going to measure, right? Is there an approach to that, or do you provide templates for companies and tweak it? I mean, what's that approach? Is it everything, right? If you're measuring the wrong stuff, you got the wrong answer, and you're going to focus on the wrong thing anyway. It's so critical to get that satisfaction, the right criteria, right? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks for the feedback on the, we understand and are still working through that complexity, right? In our own SWOT analysis, the best thing about our tool is that as a strategic partner or as an HR professional, you can pretty much answer any question you need to answer in one place with this thing, right? I don't need 15 different surveys. I don't need 1,000 different analytics. But the bad part about that is you have one place with all these questions and answers. So it can be overwhelming if you're not familiar with the tool. You're absolutely right there. And I think that is a reason why, 2 things. When I go talk to an organization, I only take them through the parts that they care about. I don't go through this full thing. But with y'all, I wanted to just get feedback on the different modules. But you're absolutely right. Now, the bad thing is, again, getting lost at sea. That's why we have our own team that does analysis on the big trends. That's why we have partners that are so good with this. So great feedback, heard and noted. And then the question of, which items do you include in this? Because, to your point, if you're not measuring it, you're missing a whole story. Yeah, we definitely have a kind of standard templated list of, here are the top 30 items across the globe that we consistently see force ranked higher and higher. Now, we also have a question bank of validated items. So if there's something that's on here that, you really want to ask about, let's socially conscientiousness. That's becoming a big one for us now. As we start to see those items come up, you have a bank, and as we start to see them become more popular, we start to include those in our standard. But we do keep that about 30, or else it gets to be exhaustive asking about everything in the moon. It's hard to start to pick out your top 5 or 10 out of that. But that's the answer.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Anyone else out there?
Thanks for the feedback.
Okay, well, then I'll ask this question and maybe that'll prompt some further. So we all understand that surveys are shall we say, dependent upon response. So
Nice way.
what do you see as kind of the leverage point that your approach to this and maybe the methodology / media that you are using? Are you finding that in a sense you're getting better response from the more traditional survey? And I'm looking at it more from the standpoint of the user of a company trying to use this and really trying to hone in and getting significant response back. What have you seen in the launches is for a company, and how does the product really lend itself to getting better response?
Yeah, great question. And it's kind of 2 things. Number one is first, again, and I want to beat this over the head, but fundamentally, the idea of psychological safety. Again, I can't stress that enough. These surveys and these assessments are not psychologically safe. Stephen, how good do you like your boss? I don't know. Well, on a scale of 1 to 5, depends. Is my boss going to see the answers? And if yes, 5, best boss I ever had, right? Or I'm going to hit 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. I mean, as a survey guy, I've seen all those in the field. The second I feel like my psychological safety is compromised, I'm either not answering or I'm going to give you junk data. God forbid you're taking action on that junk data, right? Number 2, though, is really that user experience. We are not an exhaustive list of here's a bunch of items behaviorally and network and culture and environment. Here's a bunch of items. Answer all those on a scale of 1 to 5. That's not at all what we do. We ask questions about prioritization. We make people choose from different places that matter most. We make people click on the teams they work with the most. And we do a lot of those branching items, like I mentioned. So the experience itself feels like a conversation. It feels like a dynamic experience versus the same exhaustive list of 1 to 5 questions that we've always answered. And for the likability or usability and the high user experience, along with that feeling of psychological safety, that's really why we're seeing a lot of employee participation without giving out names. We don't go crack whips. We don't let people know who has or haven't answered. That's an organic 80% response rate. So I'd probably put it to those two factors.
Gotcha. And the old traditional perspective of, I don't want somebody to game the survey, so I'm going to toss in a couple of questions that you have to answer, if you will, differently than you did the last one by, change a word or whatever. Anything like that inherent in this, or are you just not needing it because of what you just said?
Yeah, so for ours, it's really more about understanding prioritization, and that really helps get to some of that. But, one of our mottos or sales pitches, if you will, is we focus on needs, not wants. We're not asking people, do you want to, what kind of desk do you want? Do you want to be this? Do you want to be that? A lot of times we don't know those answers. So a lot of times we're focusing on the what you're doing. And then we will translate that into things like, well, here's the kind of space that would support you. Here's the kind of technology that would support this organization. So to answer that question, it's, with knowledge worker, to Jamal's point, it's really understanding where do you put your time? How do you perceive that value? Because honestly, if 10 out of 10 people are telling me that time and formal meetings aren't important, I either got to change my formal meetings to make them more important, or I'll save some time and not do them and find a new way to team up and communicate.
This Paul, you mentioned something there that's near and dear to my heart as a project manager, is where do you put your time?
Yeah.
As a project manager, I've been in the business for 40 years. I have found consistently people never get right where they put their time.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's a pretty huge hurdle. People always think they spend less time or more time on something. So do you have any way that you validate?
Yeah, so some of our clients will certainly do things like seat sensors or badge data, and they'll try to put this in there. There's a few things when it comes to asking that question, both technical and philosophical. Honestly, this sounds nerdy, but on the technical side, it's been proven that if you ask people about the percentage of time they're working versus the number of hours, you get a much more accurate answer. But more importantly, philosophically, yeah, we're not at all ever claiming to have, you know, the hours down to the T. That's not honestly what our goal is. Our goal is to understand the mismatch of value between time and effort. We're looking for big chunks. I'm not looking at the difference of shaving an hour a week. It's understanding where do you feel like you put your most time and the value provides. And that's where our consultants and our team go in to now diagnose and say, hey, you're saying you're doing a lot of this and you're not any of this. Let me see if that jives with, you know, the conversation. So this isn't a silver bullet. We say this is an organizational DNA. This is an organizational MRI. We still need the surgeons to go in, like yourself, and to look at that, you know, MRI and say, hey, I'm seeing your test scores look like this. Tell me what's going on here. And that's kind of the model in which we talked about that partner vendor technology relationship.
I'd also add, keep in mind the sample size we're talking about, 80%. So even if one person is probably a little inaccurate with their numbers, you're looking at such a large sample size that will wash out with the rest of the responses for the most part. It's probably easiest and most direct way to say it.
Good call.
Very cool. Well, I'm doing a quick time check. Let me do one more pass through the audience. Any further questions? I'm certainly sure that Stephen and Jamal would appreciate any perspectives. I'll start that conversation real quickly by saying I'm not only pleased with what I'm saying, I'm amazed with what I'm saying. I want to say that this is probably the way I'd say, you know, state of the art, the way we ought to be looking at things in terms of figuring out what people need, want. You know, I like the approach. I think based on what Paul had just asked and the way you responded, Stephen, this is an investigative tool. This is not a survey. And I think that's the key to the way I would want to look at it is you go in and you investigate the problems, you dive a little deeper, but you're focusing the funnel down a little and narrowing it down to some very important aspects. And it's driven by people. That's the other thing. It's not from top down thinking, I think we need to do this, see if it works. So, you know, the old ready, fire, aim approach to doing it. So I really have to say you guys have, I think, hit upon a very superb tool. We appreciate it. Anyone else got comments, perspectives they wish to share?
You know, no, I believe I heard you say you think you need to do this, and we're right here to help you do that, my friend. In the comments,
one at home, my new job, and then God knows what else in the consulting side.
well, if you figure that out, in the comments I put our contact information just so you can have
Absolutely.
that. So,
and this crowd definitely knows that if they want to speak to either one of you and couldn't catch that one, please give me a call and I'll make sure you're hooked up. Absolutely. Sure. Gentlemen, again, thank you very, very much as always. And to the audience, as always, thank you for your continuing support. We will take a hiatus next week because I don't think anybody wants to spend Thanksgiving with me. So we'll skip next week's meeting. But keep an eye open. We've got more vendors lining up. And again, Steve and Jamal, thank you for the time. Thank you for an entertaining session. We'll see you all later.
Thanks very much for having us.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea.
Bye-bye.
Bye.